Greetings and welcome to Phantom's Edge. This will be Chapter 7 of this reading. Morning arose at the Kukala docks, and Martha was getting impatient, having worried the whole night about her son and waiting for him to return for an hour after the sun peaked over the horizon. She watched from the stern towards the city, her arms crossed at her chest, angrily gazing at each person as she carefully tried to find either Captain Caio or Thomas. The Rodania finally saw the pirate and the rest of the crew heading back to the Wild One, with two men carrying Thomas by the boy's arms and legs. Martha went to meet up with them at the plank on the ship's side, where they all boarded and stood facing the woman in a bit of fear. Caio squeezed by the group to be in front, while those carrying Thomas lowered the Rodania boy to stand him up at the captain's right side. Caio was drunk, obviously, having taken in a large few before leaving the pub, wobbling slightly from side to side as he tried to stand still. Thomas, on the other hand, was completely hypnotized from what he had experienced, smiling as he stared up slightly, with a small bit of drool readying to slide out of his barely open mouth. Martha went to her son, hugged him in great relief that he was okay, then moved back to find he was unaffected by her action. The mother then asked, "Thomas, my son, are you okay?" The crew members laughed, but after a moment Caio raised his right hand to silence them. The captain smiled as he lowered his arm, nearly toppling himself over onto Thomas, and said, "Relax, loves. The man's fun. Is that the noun?" "Kitty," Thomas happily said in his delusional state. Martha looked up at the captain with great anger and barked, "My boy is most certainly not fine, Caio. What did you do to him? And don't say you let him drink with you and the guys." "Calm down, loves. There's no need to fear." Caio actually became still for a moment, glancing away to quietly burp. Then he started wobbling again as he looked back at the Rodania mother and continued, "He has become one of us." The crew around their captain, minus Thomas and his mother, simultaneously repeated, "One of us." With that, the clear-minded men went to check on the vessel to make sure it was ready to sail. Martha glanced around at the others, confused that they weren't drunk as well, then realized it as she looked back at Caio and yelled, "You did not take my son to that god-awful parlor of yours, did you, Caio? You know I don't want him over there." Caio raised his hands to cover his ears, while he quietly said, "Please, miss, your loudness is quite..." He then lowered his arms as he ended with, "Loud." He nodded his head a few times in response to the question and said, Yes. I ordered him to follow as such to coordinates of that which reside as place for entertainment on lovelies those willing to do the do." Moaning in anger as she put what the Kanai had said to clear context in mind, Martha stared at the captain with great irritation. In her state, the mother said, "You know it's bad enough I'm letting you use Thomas to infiltrate the bureaucracy. It's worse to know that you have him hang around with your bar friends, and I don't mean those of the crew." Caio turned his eyes slowly from side to side, then looked back at the Rodania woman and said, "If it makes you feel any better, I forget you." "You mean forgive, Caio, which doesn't really work in your position." "No, I forget why you were talking to me." Martha grabbed her son's left hand to pull him towards the crew's quarters, while she barked, "Just pass out, Caio." Caio watched the two Rodanias motion away. Then when they were gone, he faced the starboard side of the ship and yelled, "Will do, loves!" As such, the Kanai fell forward onto his face and indeed passed out. He was like that for a few hours, then awoke lying face up, still on the deck of the Wild One. He blinked a couple times as his eyes focused, while noticing 3 of his crew members standing over him. Caio glanced between those watching him and asked, How many do we have? Less than half of the ship, one replied, knowing full well what the captain was asking. Sorry, sir. Who's going to be the captain of it, sir? Another asked. Kaio moved to stand himself up, glanced around the Wild One, then stared out at the Andromeda as he barked, Me! You, Captain? But you already command the Wild One, sir. Won't that be a bit difficult? Aye, the Kanai said as he motioned to the stern. I shall command both vessels like I command my stomach. Are you sure, Captain? The first asked. His hands up on his hips, Kaio replied, I've never been so sure than the lunch I threw up last night outside. In the streets, mind you. That's true. Fried chicken with buttered corn and Swiss cheese, the pirate exclaimed as he went to lean his right side against the front of the wheel. Topped with a mug of beer with a cherry at the bottom. Facing the second ship, Kaio burped, then quietly asked, I wonder if they can hear me. He then raised his left hand as he shouted, Yo-ho, men! Those on the Andromeda stopped for a moment to look over at Kaio. Then they went back to their preparations. One of the men near Kaio glanced at the second ship, then turned back as he asked, You sure that'll work? Kaio smiled, then quickly turned it back into a blank expression as he confidently said, No. He removed himself from the wheel and went to head for the crew's quarters, while he said, But I know what will. Thomas, still in his happy gaze, laid across his bunk on his back, while his mother and the other women tried to find ways to break him from his trance. They tried offering food, they tried shaking him, they slapped him, they even tried to poke him with a utensil. None of it, though, was able to work the slightest. However, when Kaio came to check on the boy, he glanced down to ponder, then went to the kitchen. He walked back over with a simple wooden mug full of ice-cold water and dumped it on the boy's lap. In that instant, Thomas jumped from his bed with a quick loud squeak and fell onto the floor. Kaio tossed the mug aside, then said, Up, boy. I've got another job for you. Thomas stood as he turned to the Kanai and said, Aye, Captain. Kaio raised his hand to have his palm face the boy, while he said, First things first. He then lowered his arm as he leaned forward to be eye level with the Rodenia and continued, You're going to need some new pants, lad. Thomas glanced down at himself, then raised his head as he began to blush slightly in embarrassment. Kaio smiled as he stood up and patted the boy on the head, while walking back out up to the deck. He waited at the port side of his ship, where Thomas met up with the man at his right side. Captain stood watching the Andromeda as he said, My boy, today's the day. Thomas glanced up at the man, while Kaio swung his right hand around to the boy's right shoulder and continued, The day when you learn. Thomas smiled as he asked, Really, Captain? Aye, but not here. The Kanai removed his hand as he motioned off his ship, with the boy following as the captain continued, You shall be taught first on your own lands, then on another's. What do you mean by my lands, sir? Kaio didn't answer. He just kept walking until they were both on the Andromeda, where he turned and tossed his rapier towards the boy. Thomas stopped and swiftly grabbed the hilt with his right hand, while Kaio took a few more strides back and readied himself with his saber. The Rodenia boy went to hold the sword against his captain, while the Kanai motioned his left hand behind his back. Now then, Kaio said, First, show me what you know. Don't hold back. Thomas smiled, then charged for Kaio to motion for a downward swing. Captain blocked the attack with ease, then started stepping back around the vessel with every other attack that the boy threw at him. For a first time in a fight, though it was fake, the Rodenia was quite fast and well coordinated with himself. His swings weren't too wide nor too short. He kept his distance, while also trying to maintain enough range with his blade for a decent strike. He even got clever with his surroundings, using the railing or barrels to get higher ground every so often to either dodge or to counter a swing from the Kanai. Kaio motioned himself behind the pillar to the mainsail, but peeked out the sides as a means to get Thomas to strike him. The captain poked his head out one side and quickly said, "Tally-ho, lad." The boy swung his blade down, but missed as the man leaned back behind the pillar to stick his head out the other side. "I'm over here," the Kanai said, waiting until the Rodania swung at him once more. Afterwards, he stuck his left foot out, which Thomas went to stab down at. The boy missed as the other foot stepped out, which he then went to stomp on with his own left foot. Amazingly, Kaio didn't dodge that and actually started hopping backwards as he held his boot for a moment in pain. Once the man lowered his leg, Thomas raised his sword to aim the tip at the captain's neck, claiming victory over the fight. Kaio glanced down at the blade, then looked at the boy and said, "That was a dirty trick, young man." "Works though, huh?" Kaio tilted his head slightly to his right, while he complied, "That it did." The Kanai stepped back to ready himself once more against the Rodenu boy, switching his saber into his left hand as he removed the cutlass into his right. Thomas glanced around for another sword, then saw a crew member toss him their own. It was given to him in its case, but the boy grasped the hilt and swung the sword out from his left to throw the case aside as to unsheath the weapon. The boy readied the second blade as well against the man, while Kaio smiled and said, "Come now, lad. You don't actually think you can fight on my terms now, do you?" "I can try." That's the spirit." With that, Kaio made the first move. He jolted for the boy, swinging both swords wildly as he spun himself every so often. Yet Thomas was able to block each strike in nearly the same motion. After just a few strikes, Kaio stopped to step back and separate himself from the Rodenia as he said, "Fascinating." The battle continued as Martha was informed about the fight on the Andromeda. She went out onto the deck of the Wild One to look out over at the other ship, finding Kaio and Thomas fighting nearly equal to one another with their blades. She should have been horrified and furious at what the Kanai was doing with her son, but was actually surprised and a little happily excited to see the two as they were. While they motioned around, the two swordsmen knocked over a barrel holding several loaded guns, yet continued swaying their swords at each other. Eventually, Kaio stopped swinging his blades and went to stand still as he dodged each strike Thomas had to give. The captain leaned from side to side with the weapon's motion and bent himself away from the thrusts. The Kanai even jumped over some strikes, flipping himself around a few times as a means to show off his skills. After a minute, he continued to clash swords with the boy as he stepped away from the guns that fell onto the floor. Finally, Kaio used both his blades to circle around Thomas's, where he was able to toss them out of the boy's grasp and away to the deck's sides. Holding his two swords out a bit, Kaio said, "Aha, my dear boy, you were good, but you have lost to the best." Thomas stood confident against the man, stomping his right foot once on the deck of the ship. Oddly enough, he busted a plank and got one of the pistols that fell from the barrel to pop up near his back, where he reached over his right shoulder with his right hand to grasp it by the handle. He quickly raised and aimed the weapon in the air, pulling the trigger to fire the one shot in it. Everyone stood still, slightly shocked by the noise yet confused at the scene, while Kaio chuckled for a moment as he lowered his swords. He glanced out from both his sides, then looked back at the boy and asked, "What was that?" Just then, a filled supply sack, used for the crow's nest, fell and struck Kaio directly on his head. Kanai stood stunned as he dropped both blades in his hands. Then before he fell, he asked, "What was that?" When the captain hit the floor, Thomas tossed the pistol aside, then glanced over at the sack and thought, "Wonder what was in that thing. I was hoping to just distract him." Having witnessed her son somehow best the dual-edged demon, Martha said, "Wow, he actually got him." The crew went to help Kaio up, calling out to him as they smacked his shoulders and face a few times. Then when he didn't wake from that, they tossed him off the starboard side of the Andromeda. He instantly awoke from the fall and painfully belly-flopped. Then the Kanai swam to climb back onto the docks, where he headed onto the battleship to retrieve his swords. Once Thomas gave his captain the rapier back, Kaio said, "Excellent, my dear boy. Although..." He took in a deep breath, then continued, "You could have moved faster and more steadily with your feet. I counted 6 times where I could have tripped you, and you would have been dead. Other than that, I do say that you could take on even Phytogras, Emperor of the Labors." He then slapped his right hand on the Rodania boy's left shoulder and said, "Unfortunately, if you were to fight him, we need to get something that will allow you to stand against his armory. Weapons of our grade won't be enough." Thomas looked up at Kaio, confused, and asked, "Are we going against him, sir?" "No," Kaio barked as he removed his hand from the boy. "That would be suicidal. I still have a life to live. Besides, he's with us, and being with us, we're to see about getting those fancy new weapons he owes me. On that note, congratulations." "For what?" The captain glanced at the new crew members of the second vessel and said, "The Andromeda shall be captained by none other than Thomas himself." Everyone cheered, while Kaio looked back down at the boy and said, "Watch the Wild One's movements and follow closely behind, lad. Captain." Thomas smiled, then glanced over at a crew member who went to cling onto him and playfully, yet roughly, rubbed the boy's head. Kaio motioned to step off the ship as he yelled, "Ready to set sail, lads!" "Aye, Captain!" they all shouted. As the 2 ships set sail for Mongoma, the Kanai stood on the railing of the Wild One at the tip of the bow as he placed his left hand onto one of his left side swords. As commanded, Thomas sailed the Andromeda behind Captain Kaio's Wild One, with enough distance should something happen. Both captains knew of what the other was to do, even though they weren't going to be communicating while out at sea. It seemed highly illogical, but it worked. This concludes the reading of Chapter 7. Thank you all for watching and listening. If you like what you've seen and heard, be sure to check out my other 2 novels, Lore of the Endowment and Ryu the Demon Slayer. Links will be in the description below. Other than that, stay safe, take care, and we'll see you next week reading Chapter 8.